Hi, I'm the Lockpicking Cuber. In this video I'm going to be having a look at an incredible literary puzzle called Microcosm, which remains unsolved after nearly 40 years. So I first came across this book when I was a kid in the 1980s. I found it in my local bookshop, and although I didn't really understand what it was, I couldn't resist buying it. Partly I was attracted by these weirdly beautiful images, partly I was attracted by the possibility of winning a cash prize and a trip on Concorde, but mostly I think it was the fact that this book was designed to be solved on a computer, and it came with everything you needed to solve it. I was very into computers as a kid, which in those days wasn't particularly a common interest. So I bought this book and I did the things it told me to do and played with it for a while, but I didn't make any progress at all. However, I did spend hours just looking at the pictures and the words in the book. I don't actually know what happened to that copy of the book. I guess it's long gone now. But a few years back, having forgotten actually anything about what the book was called or who wrote it or anything like that, I did some internet research and I eventually found it on Amazon, no longer in print but available secondhand, so I bought this copy. And here it is. It's called Microcosm. It's by Gashtan, illustrated by Nicholas Mynheer. More about him a bit later. So, what is Microcosm? Well, it's a puzzle. As it says on the back of the book, the prize was £1,000 and a trip across the Atlantic on Concorde. It was described as a transatlantic computer puzzle challenge, suitable for anyone with access to a personal computer. And in those days, personal computers weren't really something you'd find in every home or library, so not everyone would have been able to enter, and I think that was part of what gave my teenage self the rather naive hope that I might be the one who'd be able to crack this puzzle. On the back of the book, it also explains in July 1984 an envelope was placed in the room pictured above, in which there is a telephone. The winner of the challenge will be the first person to call this room and state the name, which is written on a slip of paper sealed inside the envelope. If you solve the puzzle of this book, the computer will reveal all the information required. The location of the room is known only to the publishers of Creative Computing and Your Computer, and to the publishers Lazy Summer Books Limited, and to whoever will answer the telephone. Now, I think it's a safe bet that that envelope and telephone no longer exist, or at least they're not in this room anymore. I have no reason to believe that it's possible to claim this prize, but I still think it's a puzzle worth solving, and if you keep watching this video, I think you'll agree. So, let's have a look inside. First of all, we have a quote, which is from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and I'll just note that there are 16 lines to this quote. I'm not sure how relevant that is, but as you'll see, 16 lines, that's a recurring thing in this book. So next we move on to page 1. Again, we have 16 lines of verse on the left-hand side, but this time, as far as I can tell, these aren't quoted from anywhere. They're made up by Gashtan for the book, and they're extremely opaque. So let's have a look. Of a prince in the east, a man of nature, chosen by the people, a council of 3. Who knows what that means? On the right-hand side, we have this incredible illustration by Nicholas Mynheer. And you can probably get a feel from this page why my teenage self was so taken with the pictures and the book as a whole. There's so much to see in this picture, right? But let's have a look at a couple of things in particular. So there's some runes on the goblet here, and they say look carefully, which seems like good advice in general for the book. More interestingly, perhaps, we have this key with a string of text in it. And up here, if you look carefully, we have another one, another string. Both of them are 20 characters and then a letter L and then a number. What else do we have? Well, we have some planets in various places. Another one here. We have a boat with a dragon head. We have this up here, which is a real thing. This is the White Horse of Uffington, which is a drawing of a horse that was made in prehistoric times, which is still there on a hill in Oxfordshire. We also have a book of writing down here. Most of this you can't read, but if you look very carefully at this first line, it says, "And so it begins, a bridge across chaos." Okay, so that's page 1. Following that, we have 12 more of these pages. There's a total of 13 pages of verse. Always we get 16 lines and a corresponding image. Always we have at least one of these 20 character keys, and then an L and then a number. We often get runes, not always. Sometimes the images line up to some extent with the text. So let's take this as an example. The guard sleeps in the text, and over here I guess this is a guard and his head is tilted down, looks like he's sleeping. By the way, have a note of his sword. This sword recurs in a number of the pictures. Who knows what it means, but it's there. Perhaps there are also some subtler connections. So on page 6, for example, we have a banquet of kings, the admiral's party. And over on the right-hand side, we have some kings, I guess, judging from their crowns, having a banquet. And then there's this butterfly, which I believe is a red admiral, a type of butterfly. I'll come back to the butterfly a little bit later. Anyway, like I said, there's a total of 13 of these pages with verse on one side and amazing illustrations on the other. And then, at the end of all of that, here we go, we get this. And this is a computer program. So this was written in BASIC, which was the main programming language used in home computers in the 80s. It's a very simple program, so it was really easy for me to reproduce this in Python, which is a more modern language. We don't really get much in the way of instructions here about how to use the program, apart from the code itself. And then a couple of suggestions down here. So it says, why don't you extend the program to save you the work of typing the same information over and over again? Try writing a program to search for words or strings of letters appearing in the message. So obviously I did both of those things. Just before we talk about the program in a little bit more detail, let's just jump to the very final page. Here we have ordered by Khayyam. I don't know if that means placed in order or ordered in the sense of demanded. But anyway, we have 1 key for every message for 13 messages, 5 keys, and we get 5 more of these 20 character keys, but without the L and the number after them. Currently, I have no idea what these keys are for. My guess is that once we figured out the first part of the puzzle, these keys will become useful. Anyway, so what does this program do? Well, it takes in 13 lines of text and 1 key. So 1 line of text from each page of verse, and then 1 of these keys from one of the illustration pages. What the program does is it adds up the letters that you've entered. So how do we do that? Well, we treat each letter as an ASCII value. ASCII is a code that computers have used for decades to represent the various letters and other characters and symbols that we type and display on computers. So each letter, each number, punctuation mark, and other symbol has its own unique ASCII value. So 65 for capital A, for example. So what the program does, it finds the ASCII value of the first character, for example. It moves on 20 characters from there, round to the 21st character, and it adds those ASCII values together. 20 more characters, that one, adds that in. Keeps going, adding every 20th value, and then it does the same with the second and the 22nd and so on and so on. It does this for 20 positions, so you end up with 20 sums of these ASCII values. And once it's done, for each of these values, you keep subtracting 26 until you get to a number between 1 and 26, which you then convert back into ASCII. So 1 would become A, for example. The only exception is Z, which becomes a space. So you basically can't get a message with a Z in it. Anyway, if all that sounds complicated, it's because I'm not explaining it very well, but it really is actually very simple. It's also very clever because it has some really useful properties that I think the designers of the puzzle wanted. So in particular, it makes it very hard to get close. It makes it very hard to know that you're close to the solution. I'm sure this is deliberate. What I mean by this is if you get all 13 lines right apart from 1, you get nothing, you just get gibberish. Anyway, as I said, as a kid I made no progress whatsoever in solving this puzzle, but I did enjoy the experience of looking at the pictures and reading the words and pondering over what it could all mean. But now that I have the benefit of the internet, I figured I'd find somebody who'd already solved it and learn from what they did, but as far as I can tell, no one has ever solved it. At least no one has ever solved it and thought to mention it online, which I take as pretty solid evidence that no one has ever solved it. What I did find though was 1 or 2 posts about the book and a few other things, and at least 1 or 2 people who've made little tiny bits of progress with solving the puzzle, as I'll show you. But before we get onto that, I wanted to show you this. This is an advertisement for the game, which appeared in Your Computer magazine in March 1985. Now, I think without this advertisement, the puzzle would have been impossible to solve. Why is that? Well, there's a couple of clues that are given here and some instructions as well. So the 2 clues are each page contains a line incorporating the name of a personal computer. There's 1 theme, only 12 more to go. And then, how much do you know about George Washington? He features in every page. Actually though, although those are very useful clues, the real clue, and what should perhaps have been put in the book, is this, because it tells you how to use the computer program. It says, study the 13 verses, searching for a common theme, linking 1 line from each. Use the illustrations for clues. Type in the 13 lines you have chosen together with a letter key taken from one of the illustrations. If you've chosen correctly, the computer will print a message. When you've got 13 messages, you'll be led on to the next part of the puzzle. Okay, so what does all that mean? Well, if we take a look at clue number 1, which said that one of the themes is computers, this means computers, or the names of computers from the 1980s, because that's when the book came out. So if we look at page number 1, we see In the Land of the Dragon. And if you're as old as me, you might remember that the Dragon was a type of computer. There was a Dragon 32 and a Dragon 64 and so on. So each page contains at least one line that has the name of an old computer. We've got Exchange of Apples on this page, for example. Unfortunately, and slightly awkwardly, on that page we also have the Dragon Slayer. So that's the name of a computer, the Dragon, and Apple is another name of a computer. So you have to pick the right line, not just the one line that contains a computer. But if you do pick the correct 13 lines, and you combine those with the correct key, which happens to be, for reasons I don't know, the key that you can find on page 9, the illustration on page 9, if you combine all of those together, then this happens. It's a bit of an anticlimax, right? It says, find 13, not me. At least it's English, so we can feel pretty confident that it's a real message and not just random chance. But notice if we just make one small change to the lines, if for example we pick Behold Jupiter's children, Jupiter being a valid computer, instead of Emperor Wang mourns, we get gibberish. Now I should stress I wasn't the first person to discover this. I found a reference to this solution or partial solution on the forum that I mentioned before, but I have managed to reproduce this result with my Python code, so this gives me confidence that the code I've written is doing the right thing, probably. Now, just thinking about the scale of this to give you an idea of how hard this task is, if we were to just try all possible combinations, picking one line at random from each page and then picking one key at random, there'd be a total of about 6 times 10 to the power of 16, so a 6 with 16 zeros after it, combinations. And if we could check, say, 1 million of them a second, it would probably take about 2,000 years to run through all those combinations. I see this as both good and bad news. It's bad news in that it's not going to be cheap or easy to have a computer program try every single combination, but it's good news because that means there's a real puzzle to solve here. It's not trivial. The nature of the puzzle then can be considered to be finding the right theme and then picking the right lines to represent that theme, and you need to do that 13 times. We already know the first 2 themes. There's computers, and then, as it said in the advertisement, George Washington. That's the second theme. I've been trying for weeks to try to find the right lines to represent George Washington, but I have so far not managed it. It's harder than you'd think. So, for example, if we look at page 8, should we pick perhaps Chief of the Rebels? That could be George Washington, or he was also a man of letters. That sounds reasonable. Or the old ruler is banished, talking about George III. These all seem reasonable. Or maybe even he rejects a proposal. I think George Washington rejected some proposals. I've tried all the combinations of all the lines that I can think of that seem to me like they connect with George Washington, or could connect with George Washington. I've tried them in combination with all the keys, and I've got nowhere. So if you consider yourself to be an expert on George Washington, perhaps, then please do take a look and let me know if you think you can see where I'm going wrong. Now, let's note one more mystery. Each of these keys has a letter L and then a number after it. The key we used to decrypt the one message that we've got so far was this one, which has an L1 at the end of it, but most of the rest of them have some number other than 1. So this one has L3, for example. What does this mean? It's not referenced in the code, it's not referenced in the book, it's not referenced in the 1985 advertisement. What does it mean? Well, my hypothesis is that it tells you that you need to cycle through the lines starting from a particular spot. So if we take L1, that tells us we're going to start with a line from verse 1, line 1, in other words. But if we use the key that has L3, my guess is that means you start with the line from verse 3, work your way through to the end, and then cycle back to the beginning and include lines 1 and 2. This is what my code is doing. Maybe this is wrong. One point about it is this one. So here we have L14. There are 13 verses. So what does this mean? Well, there isn't a page 14, so there isn't a line 14, or is there? Actually, when we enter the information into the program, we type in 13 lines of verse and then a key. So the key is actually the 14th line itself. So if my hypothesis is right, then with this key we start with the key itself and then we go on to line 1 of verse and 2 and 3 and so on. Who knows? All right, what do we know? So we know there are 13 themes because it tells us in the advertisement. We know that 2 of the themes are George Washington and 1980s home computers. We know that you have to pick one line from each of the 13 verses to match up with a theme, combine them with a key, enter them into the computer program, and this will give you a message. And you do this 13 times, it'll give you 13 messages, and somehow those messages are going to combine to tell you what to do next. We also know that ultimately we're looking for a phone number and a name. On top of this, I have some hypotheses. So these are not certainties, but I have some hypotheses about the themes. The first one is Jesus. There's actually quite a lot of references to things that could be Jesus in here. He wears a different crown on this page, for example. We have references to temples and kings and crucifixion and so on. Again, I've never found anything that works. Secondly, and much more obscurely, there's an 18th century Pacific islander known as Omai. So one of the pages has this line, "How do King Tosh?" This was a line supposedly said by Omai to King George III. And there's a few other references that somewhat obliquely seem to relate to Omai as well. Third, butterflies. I'll explain why I thought of this a bit later, but note there are lots of pictures on this page of what seem to be quite specific types of butterfly. And there are references to admirals and emperors and various other names that are parts of the names of butterflies throughout the text. Again, seems like it fits, but I haven't yet found a combination of lines that produces anything meaningful. Fourth one is a little bit of a stretch, but it's spelling mistakes. So first, in this one on page 9, we have a duel in court. And if this means a duel like the type that's being illustrated here, it should be spelled D-U-E-L, not D-U-A-L. Maybe that's a deliberate spelling mistake. And then on page 1, we also have this reference to one forged by Wayland. And near the Horse of Uffington is something called Wayland's Smithy, where things were forged, but it's spelt with an A, not an E. W-A-Y-L-A-N-D. Those are a couple of spelling mistakes that I found, or what I assume might be deliberate spelling mistakes. I haven't really found any others. Other ideas that I have are types of fruit, countries, types of leader or ruler, military ranks, journeys, which get mentioned a lot. But so far I've had no success with any of these. My code, including my chosen lines from the verses, is all on GitHub. I'll link to it down below so you can try it yourselves and try your own combinations of lines and keys as well. I've also set up a subreddit, r/solving microcosm, which I hope some of you might like to join and discuss ideas in. The nice thing about this puzzle is that although there is a need for computing, pretty minimal skills and resources are required there. What I think we really need is expertise on, for example, George Washington to figure out the right 13 lines to choose, and expertise on other areas to allow someone to figure out what the next themes are. So if you're interested, jump over to the Solving Microcosm subreddit and say hi. If you have ideas for themes or any other aspect of the puzzle, please do the same, or just add them as comments onto this video, that would be fine. I think it's pretty safe to say that the £1,000 prize is no longer on offer, and the Flight on Concorde obviously can't be available. But by way of incentive, I have 2 prizes to offer. The prizes are these 2 beautiful, unopened, unused Sky Dragon Rubik's Cubes, and I'll offer these to one each to the first 2 people to find any of the remaining 12 messages. This prize offer will remain open until 2 people have claimed them. There's no time limit on this, and I won't claim the prizes obviously if I manage to solve any. The book is no longer in print, unsurprisingly given how old it is, but you can find copies of this hardback available to purchase online, and there are 1 or 2 places where you can find scans of the text and images online as well. It turns out that the artwork is designed by somebody called Nicholas Mynheer. I emailed him and he actually confirmed this for me. He unfortunately also confirmed that although he was the one commissioned to produce the art for the book, he wasn't really given any of its secrets, very deliberately. He did hint that he thinks that that Red Admiral butterfly is important, and that's what led me to looking for butterflies in the rest of the text. He also said that he was pretty sure the name Hal Gashtan was a pseudonym, and that the real man behind that name was lovely, and he thought was perhaps a poet. He also thought that the money behind the book came from an enigmatic person named Nina. So there it is. If you ask me, it's one of the most enigmatic puzzles ever created. It's been nearly 40 years since it was released, and the amount of progress that's been made on it so far is minimal. So if you're interested, why not give it a go? And if you're not interested in having a go, I hope you've enjoyed the video anyway. Please do hit the subscribe button and check out my other videos. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Alright, if you're still here, I'm just going to do a slow look through all of the pages, just in case that's useful for anybody. By the way, this in runes says the eye, the dove, the tower. That says the end, and that says rest. And here we have, oh yeah, a fish with butterfly wings. Interesting. And I'm assuming, well, these are the eyes, there's the dove, but where's the tower? I don't know, is it this tower of stones? I don't know. That's it.